Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, September 15th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 1-1. I'm Josh Yourish, and today we're going to dive deep into the Steelers defense through 2 weeks, what it looks like, what the fixes might be, because I'm very worried about that unit. And we'll take another look at Aaron Rodgers' performances through 2 weeks, both week one and yesterday against the Seahawks. But first, we have to talk about Omar Khan, Andy Weidl, Pat Meyer, and the Steelers' offensive line issues. When Omar Khan became the general manager of the Steelers in 2022, the organization brought in Andy Weidl as his right-hand man. And the move made a lot of sense, not just because Weidl was previously a scout for the Steelers, starting his, personnel career in 1998, I believe, with the organization, but also because Khan was Kevin Colbert's longtime salary cap guy, not necessarily somebody with a robust history in player evaluation. Weidl came back to Pittsburgh, where he began his career, and he carried with him a reputation as somebody who wants to build through the trenches. Obviously, that's how Philadelphia has won its 2 Super Bowls in recent years. And in Khan and Weidl's first 2 drafts together, they went back-to-back offensive tackles in the first round. You certainly know that. The issue, however, is it almost seems like Andy Weidl was drafting for Jeff Stoutland in Philly, and he has Pat Meyer in Pittsburgh. And of course, I'm talking about offensive line coach Pat Meyer and legendary offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland for the Philadelphia Eagles. Stoutland is probably the best offensive line coach in the NFL right now. And if he's not, he's at the top of a very, very short list. He's built a perennial top offensive line in the NFL. He turned Jordan Mailata into a Pro Bowler. He revived Mekhi Becton's career last season and by turning him into a guard and then getting him paid by the Chargers. He developed Jason Kelsey, everything. The resume goes on and on and on. Lane Johnson, like every offensive line said, Isaac Seumalo even. Stoutland has his fingerprints all over them. Specifically with Mailata and Becton, though Weidl was not in Philadelphia for the Mekhi Becton experiment last year, which worked wonderfully as Saquon Barkley ran for over 2,000 yards in just 16 games. Those 2 are great examples of the philosophy that the Eagles have around building an offensive line and the type of players they identify as, future Eagles. He took, and once Weidl got here, he drafted pretty raw players on the offensive line. And it just has to be so difficult to shake that from your mindset. Shake the idea that if I give this rugby player who's 6'8" and one of the best athletes in the world in Jordan Mailata to Jeff Stoutland, he's going to turn him into one of the best left tackles in the game. If I bring in Mekhi Becton, again, Weidl wasn't there for that, but the same thought process of if I bring in this failed offensive tackle who's a former first rounder, who's a monster, we can move him to guard. We can cut out some of his deficiencies as a pass blocker and just turn him into this mauler, because I know Stoutland is going to take care of that transition. He's going to shepherd him through it. He's going to build him into this technically sound offensive guard when he hadn't played the position, at least not at the NFL level. It has to be so incredibly difficult and for Weidl to go from that ecosystem in Philly where you're looking for upside, you're hunting for tools, you're willing to take shots on these raw players on the offensive line because they'll be developed the right way, and then come out of that and change that mindset at all. Why would you? It worked. It led you to that 2017 Super Bowl and back to another against the Chiefs, a team that Weidl helped construct. Again, he was here in 2022. The Steelers took Broderick Jones, traded up to get Broderick Jones. And there was a clear drop off in that draft of the top tier offensive linemen, and it was going to happen after Jones. That was the general consensus, was that the drop off came after Broderick Jones went off the board. So that's why the Steelers moved up ahead of the Jets, who everyone knew was going to take Broderick Jones to protect Aaron Rodgers, and swapped with the Patriots. The Patriots took Christian Gonzalez. The Steelers got Broderick Jones. And Jones just hasn't been able to develop. Pat Meyer has not been able to turn him into a capable offensive tackle. Now Troy Fautanu, who was drafted the next year and had a redshirt because of an injury, looks like he's struggling too. And Fautanu was not somebody who I viewed as nearly as raw as Broderick Jones, if really a raw prospect at all. He was part of a Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line at Washington that helped Michael Penix get to the national championship. And this is just one game. So I'm not necessarily extrapolating out that Fautanu is now not going to be a good right tackle in the NFL, because I think he's going to be. I think he looked really strong in the preseason, but he played bad on Sunday. And the Steelers allowed a lot of pressure on Aaron Rodgers on Sunday. And the offensive line, which Weidl and Kahn have invested heavily in, is not taking any steps forward. They hit on Zach Frazier, absolutely. Frazier is one of the better centers in the NFL already. He was last season, but it doesn't seem like he's taken some massive step. The Steelers still can't run the ball. And part of that's the struggles of the interior offensive line, especially when they're trying to run so much inside zone out of shotgun as they did in week 2, because Rodgers' preference is to play from shotgun. Mason McCormick was another really raw player with a lot of tools that they took in the 4th round. McCormick was brutal in pass protection yesterday, graded out in the 30s per PFF. If you watch it, it looks about that bad, even though he ultimately only allowed 2 pressures. In week 2, Seattle edge rushers Boye Mafe and Derek Hall both posted pass rush win rates over 35%, according to ESPN's metrics and Seth Walder on Blue Sky. PFF charted Mafe with 2 pressures, Hall with 4. Seomalu, Fautanu, and Jones all allowed 3 pressures apiece. Frazier and McCormick each allowed 2. Overall, per Walder, NFL offensive pass block win rate is up across the league through 2 weeks. Yet the Steelers continue to struggle, allowing a 13.7% pressure rate and giving Rodgers 1.1 seconds of pocket time per Pro Football Reference, which is 19th in the NFL. That's not by any means disastrous, but it's not good either. This is not a good pass blocking offensive line. I don't think all of the root of their issues is in the trenches, but quite a few of them are. Even worse on the ground, too. Steelers running backs rank 30th in the NFL with 2.0 yards before contact per attempt. That's just a disastrous number. The offensive line is not getting it done. The Steelers haven't been able to run the ball at any point during Arthur Smith's tenure as the offensive coordinator. They hadn't been able to run the ball prior to that with Matt Canada or whoever was calling plays. It's been a really long time. And ultimately, that's systemic, right? Pat Meyer was hired in 2022 as the offensive line coach. The offensive line issues predate that. They essentially tie back into when Mike Munchak left, right? That seems to be the time that everyone points to as when this became a problem for the Steelers, and it's one they haven't been able to solve. As we've gone piece by piece through Omar Khan's tenure, I've generally liked most of the moves individually. But especially on the offensive line, it's landed them in a really tenuous spot. A big reason for that is the lack of development. You can look at the defensive line too. I love the Keanu Benton draft pick. They failed to develop him from a promising rookie year, and they're playing him out of position at nose tackle. Everyone can see it, and now he's one of the bigger liabilities, frankly, in the NFL on the defensive line. He's just been a disaster at the nose. I think he's fine when he's playing defensive end, but that's coaching. That's development. That's not putting players in positions to succeed. You can see it all over the roster. You can see it all over with different players that Khan has brought in through the draft, and Weidl has helped a lot in that drafting process. but it's especially on display along the offensive line. And to me, that's an area that the Steelers needed to take a massive step forward in, considering the investment they've put in to have a competent offense, especially when we get to some of the alarming numbers that I'm going to bring up in our week 2 Aaron Rodgers report. He's not a quarterback that can handle a struggling offensive line. He's not a quarterback that can create outside of the pocket anymore, that can throw off platform effectively anymore, aside from that bomb to Freiermuth on the play that was ultimately a defensive holding against Calvin Austin, because that was a beautiful throw. You're not going to see many better. This offense needs to run the ball. This offense needs to protect Aaron Rodgers. This coaching staff needs to develop Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu, and I don't have any faith that they're going to do it. So who do you blame for that? You can blame Pat Meyer. You can blame Kahn and Weidel for drafting Broderick Jones. But it feels like everyone's kind of to blame for the Steelers' issues up front. Some injury updates coming out of week 2 as well. Obviously, we know the Steelers were without Deshaun Elliott and Joey Porter Jr. They lost Isaiah Loudermilk throughout the game, which forced Logan Lee to play a lot more. Y.A. Black was already starting. Also, Alex Highsmith went down with a high ankle sprain, and he is expected to be out about 4 to 6 weeks. So we're going to get a good long look at Nick Herbig and Jack Sawyer, who both played pretty well last week. I think we're seeing a continuing trend of the edge rushers opposite TJ Watt playing really well, especially as pass rushers, while Watt maybe not so much thus far. That's the big news. Elliott and Porter are expected back sooner than that. Derek Harmon was expected to be out about a month or so, so there's a chance. I wouldn't imagine he'd be back next week as the Steelers head to Foxborough to play the Patriots. But there's a chance he's getting closer and could return in Ireland against the Vikings before the bye. All right. Before we get to the defense and potential solutions there, if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and a fan of the Still Curtain podcast, we would really appreciate if you could like this episode and, well, frankly, every episode, and subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube, as well as anywhere you get your podcast. We really appreciate the support. And if you're not familiar with the rhythm yet, we've got an instant reaction show after every game, my Monday deep dive breakdown, and then on Wednesdays, Tommy Jagai and Shane Kubis are going to take you through the week that was and the week that will be with their loaded Wednesday show. And that goes live at 1:30 p.m. as I did today. Thank you for being with me if you are. And feel free to drop any questions you have, concerns, comments, players you want me to talk about, anything in the chat. I always appreciate that interaction. We had a good bit of it for the instant reaction show, and that's always fun. To the defense. Let's just look at some numbers, because yesterday on the instant reaction, I laid out a lot of my worries about that unit because it looks really bad. And you can, seven of those 31 points that Seattle scored are off of the Caleb Johnson mistake on the kick return, leaving the ball in the end zone, leaving the live ball in the end zone for the touchdown. But regardless of the points that were ultimately put on the board, on a down-to-down basis, this is flat out one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Our friend, you can get these numbers a lot of different places, but our friend Derek Bell, Steelers DB on Twitter, had this morning, always has the statistical breakdowns the day after the game, where the Steelers rank in the NFL. The Steelers defense, 26th in EPA per play, 27th in success rate, 25th in dropback EPA, 27th in dropback success rate, 28th in rushing EPA, 22nd in rushing success rate. Alarming. Again, missing pieces, missing Elliott, missing Joey Porter Jr., missing Highsmith for much of the game. Patrick Queen went out for a stretch. But no Derek Harmon. But there are schematic issues, and there are just players not making plays issues. I've done my best to highlight all the schematic stuff. I just think it's incredibly stale in coverage. Teams know the answers, and the Steelers are getting carved over the middle of the field because of it. You can just attack cover 3 there so easily. And that's especially where Clint Kubiak and Sam Darnold want to attack. So they feasted, especially on 3rd and longs. The Steelers could not get off the field on 3rd and longs. The Torrey Horton touchdown to open the scoring was on a 3rd and long. And then that goes to the other issue. If you're getting a defense into 3rd and long, and Zach Charbonnet was completely ineffective on the ground, Kenneth Walker was not. He forced 11 missed tackles. So there's another issue if you want to add them up, start a list. The pass rushers up front, which is supposed to be the strength of this defense. This defense has aging playmakers in the secondary and high-priced linebacker, but ultimately this is a defense that should be winning at the line of scrimmage, dominating the trenches because of Hayward, because of Watt, because of Highsmith Herbig. That group is just not getting after the quarterback. And it starts with TJ Watt. 2 pressures for Watt in week 2, 8.7% pass rush win rate per PFF. Now has gone 6 consecutive games without a sack. Cam Hayward got more done. He forced the turnover. Obviously, with the batted Sam Darnold pass, busting through the line. I thought Hayward was a lot better than he was in week 1, and especially jumped out kind of on a rewatch. Herbig, if you go with ESPN's pass rush win metrics, was over 30%. He was up there with Mafe and Hall as one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Had a couple of pressures. I thought Herbig was really good again. I love Herbig. You're never going to, rarely are you going to hear me say a bad word about Nick Herbig. I think he's just such a quick rusher off the edge, and he's going to do so much damage in one-on-ones when the game plan is to slow down TJ Watt and you're sending chips and double teams that way. That's always going to be the plan. So that's part of why Watt is struggling ultimately as a pass rusher right now. Teams are still running away from Watt like crazy. They just won't run to his side. Still continues to be a dominant run defender. But when you're getting paid $41 million a year, getting paid Myles Garrett money, and Jack Sawyer has a sack before you in the season, that's a big issue. Like, that's a huge problem. And when your defense can't get off the field on 3rd and long, that's exactly what you pay an edge rusher like TJ Watt for. There was a story up on StoCurtain.com today, written by Shane Kubis, who is the co-host of the Wednesday show that you'll hear in 2 days, talking about how the Steelers should already be regretting their massive TJ Watt contract. And I didn't think it was a good deal when it was signed. I didn't love the idea of paying him that much money. Ultimately, I settled on it's not a disaster because you're not going to be paying a quarterback at any point over that stretch. And if you're going to go with Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback for this year, it makes very little sense to then trade TJ Watt. You have to just try to milk what you can out of this year and see if you can get a playoff win. To me, that ship has already sailed because of the concerns I have about the defense. Rodgers looks like what I expected, which is not very good. But the defense and Watt specifically are just not getting it done through 2 games. Okay, if your best defensive player isn't making plays, what about another superstar you have on the defense? Jalen Ramsey. I talked yesterday about his struggles in coverage and about how it's clear and obvious that nobody fears him anymore as a cover corner. He's playing the nickel a lot more than he was last year as an outside corner with Miami. There's a reason Miami was willing to move on from him, just like there was a reason the Steelers were willing to move on from Minkah Fitzpatrick. So I don't think, again, that's a trade in a vacuum that I like. It ultimately ends up with this incredibly fickle roster that's relying on aging players, lacks depth, and continually tries to just plug holes instead of building up an area of strength. It's the reason I loved the Derek Harmon pick on the defensive line, because I felt like for the first time, while there are holes there, absolutely, for maybe the first time in the Con and Weidl era, and even predating that for the first time in a long time, the Steelers were just drafting one of the best players available and trying to add to what I believed at the time to be something of a strength, instead of plugging a hole of obvious need. Like the obvious need pick would have been to reach on a wide receiver. I mean, at the time, George Pickens was still there and you had traded for DK Metcalf, so I guess not. But reach for a cornerback because you hadn't made the Jalen Ramsey trade yet. Instead, you draft Harmon, which I think was the right decision. You're trying to build an area of strength. I think drafting back-to-back offensive tackles in the first two drafts was theoretically the right decision. Did they get the right guys? Are they being developed right? Those are all questions. But you're trying to build positions of strength. It feels like they're finally doing that, instead of most of this roster has been built on just plugging holes, right? We had a comment yesterday on the Instant Reaction show. The Steelers need to trade for a left tackle. Yes, they need a new left tackle. You can't just continue to trade to try to plug holes, because you end up with a roster where the timeline doesn't really make sense, which is, I feel like, where the Steelers are at. And you just create more problems as players age out, as players fail to develop, because not every player you draft is going to turn into what you expected when you took them. So I think there are a lot of issues with this build, but you have Ramsey at cornerback, an area that you feel like maybe was going to be a strength. He was targeted 11 times, allowed 9 catches for 128 yards and a touchdown. Again, this defense was missing Harmon, Elliott, Joey Porter Jr., Highsmith, Loudermilk, a lot of pieces. But your supposed superstars were still there, and they just weren't making plays. In the chat, rbarley18, we always love when rbarley18 comes around, loyal listener. Watt's lack of explosion is glaring. I agree. As a pass rusher, I don't think he has nearly the same pop. I think you saw that in week 1 when Armon Membu, a rookie right tackle, completely swallowed him up. And Watt has never had the most diverse pass rushing package. He relies a lot on speed, and ultimately a lot of pass rushing is just converting speed to power. That's really what it is. But I think there are a lot of examples where Watt is just not countering nearly enough. Watt doesn't have enough moves, clubs in his bag, as we have a guest here who needs to stay off the desk. Enough answers as he's aging and as he's losing that explosion. rbarley18 again in the chat, and I'll take the bait on this, Josh. I disagree. This timeline makes sense. Tomlin and Art finally leave, and Danny Rooney can come in and do what he wants. I agree with that timeline. I think that's great. I think the narrative of this being like an all-in team was wrong. It is not true. Especially with the draft capital they have in the future. There are still a lot of ways out of this aging roster. You can say it lines up because it's this aging roster altogether. But yeah, I agree. My preferred timeline would be moving on from Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney maybe not having as much control. And John Edberg in the chat again, I have no confidence that they can assess or develop the next QB. That puts them out years before becoming Super Bowl contenders. And again, I agree with you there. I think there are plenty of reasons to be done with the Mike Tomlin era. And again, I said on last show, I wasn't going to devolve every show into the Steelers need a new head coach, but here we are. So let's talk it through. I don't have faith either. I don't have faith because we saw it with Kenny Pickett was never going to be developed, right? That was a lack of identification. I would have rather taken the swing on Malik Willis, who was ultimately proven not to be a good quarterback in the NFL, though Matt LaFleur has found a way to win with him. Just because you're taking a swing on tools, right? You need that upside swing. Kenny Pickett never had those tools. He wasn't an elite processor, not a highly accurate thrower, and he didn't create outside the pocket. Like, so much of how he won at Pitt was creating outside of the pocket, being a better athlete. He was 24 years old. Justin Fields, then, how he wins is by being an athlete, right? And we saw that in week 1 against the Steelers, being able to move the pocket for him, include him in the run game, get him using his legs, and then throwing outside the numbers, right? When you're doing RPOs with Justin Fields, you don't want to do them over the middle of the field. And the Steelers didn't throw over the middle of the field very much early in the season, but they were able to, the Jets in week 1 and Tanner Engstrom, and we don't need to talk about the Jets in week 2, were able to create those conflicts to the outside where Fields is more comfortable throwing. Like, they just empowered him to do what he does well. And he did it against the Steelers defense that I think is really bad. So the jury's still out, but I don't think, well, I don't know if the jury's out on Fields. Fields is not a franchise quarterback in the NFL. But regardless, the Steelers didn't maximize him. And what you need to do to develop a quarterback is to maximize their skill set. So I have a lot of concerns, as John does in the chat, about the ability of this coaching staff to develop the next quarterback. And we're already talking about the next quarterback 2 weeks into the season, because I think it's very clear that Aaron Rodgers is an incredibly limited player, and this offense is going to be bad again. And John, to your point in the chat, which I'll pull up again here before we move on and talk about Rodgers a little bit more, the building block should be hiring an elite, new, innovative offensive coordinator, no matter the cost and short period of time with the team, and let him find his QB. Again, I agree with that too. Mike Tomlin and Art Rooney, and Mike Tomlin has never really identified those up and coming young talents on offense or anywhere. He goes with retreads. He likes to have a lot of control. And I think Art Rooney doesn't invest very much in the coaching staff, so they don't really have that ability. There's no Mike Tomlin coaching tree for a reason, for a lot of reasons. And I think it's going to be an uphill battle for this coaching staff and this organization to develop the next quarterback when we get to that point, because it feels like everything is building to that in the 2026 draft, taking a quarterback in the first round in Pittsburgh. And wouldn't the Rooneys absolutely love that? Okay. The Rodgers report for week 2. I did an abridged version in the instant reaction. I think the Rodgers report is going to be a weekly recurring segment, because we just have to talk about how the quarterback's playing, and I love some alliteration. Let's start with the interception in the end zone, because I think this is something I glossed over. This is something that was brought up in the comments of the instant reaction show, that I didn't really talk about, the potential of the Steelers scoring a touchdown on that drive to go up 21-14. We'll just dig into set the scene and talk it through. Rodgers throws a pick on 3rd and goal in the end zone from the Seahawks 4, with the game tied at 14-14, 4:12 left in the 3rd quarter. It was Calvin Austin's fault. Rodgers confirmed as much today in his press conference. Confirmed that it was Austin should have run to the flat, and they have rules for that type of scramble drill, and that throw was intended for Freiermuth. It wasn't so much Rodgers like completely throwing him under the bus. I think he was just explaining it and said Austin's a great kid. I don't think there's any off-field issues with anything Rodgers has done as a leader or anything like that. Like, I thought he handled it fine. I had no issues with the comments. I'm not convinced that it was going to be a touchdown had Austin gone to the flat. Still, it would have made the game 21-14. If it's not a touchdown, it's incomplete. Okay, you kick a field goal. Now it's 17-14. If you take away the Johnson kick return blunder, you pretty quickly have a different outlook on this game and a much greater chance that the Steelers win it. And I'm open to all of that. There are still huge issues with this team on both sides of the ball that would be setting off major alarms for me, even if the Steelers were 2-0. So the result kind of, even if in some ways it was fluky because of those unique mistakes, the result confirms to me what I'm seeing with this team, what the numbers say about this team, that it's not a good football team. So even if the Steelers were 2-0 right now, I'd be massively concerned. Massively concerned. I was worried about this team and was pretty resoundingly negative coming out of week 1. Partially because I thought the Jets were bad, like are a bad team, which was confirmed by the Bills in week 2. The NFL is such a week to week league and it's matchup based and whatnot. But I think it's pretty clear the Jets are not going to be a playoff team. And because of the way the Steelers played, regardless of opponent, they just can't stop the run. Like there are so many issues. And a lot of those issues are on offense, and a lot of those issues are with Aaron Rodgers because even in week 1, even through 4 touchdowns, none of it was Rodgers of old. None of it was really attacking downfield. When he did throw those touchdowns, when he did push the ball, it was off of play action, largely off of under center play action. Aaron Rodgers is running the Aaron Rodgers offense again. That's what we saw in week 2. We saw the Aaron Rodgers offense. We didn't see the Arthur Smith offense. In week 1, I thought we saw a pretty good melding that leaned, maybe 65-35 towards Arthur Smith. In week 2, I think we saw 80-20 Rodgers. Play action rate, some of this is game script dependent, sure. But play action rate dropped from 35% in week 1 to 14% in week 2. After averaging 10.1 yards per attempt with play action with 3 touchdowns in week 1, Rodgers completed 1 of 5 attempts off play action for 5 yards in week 2. Pre-snap motion rate was 73.3% of dropbacks in week 1, which saw a pretty steep decline in week 2 as well. The new wrinkle that the Steelers kind of unveiled in week 2 felt like a very Rodgers-esque one, running 21 personnel, not with a fullback, but with Warren and Gainwell both flanking Rodgers in the shotgun. Those 21 personnel snaps resulted in negative 0.11 EPA per play. Not good at all. And a lot of that is because of some Kenneth Gainwell runs out of those looks. The 12 personnel usage climbed over 50% for the season, but the Steelers have a 60-plus pass rate out of 12 personnel. They're not running the ball very much with multiple tight ends on the field. And the Steelers rank 31st in EPA with two tight end sets, negative 0.23 EPA per pass, 27th, and negative 0.12 EPA per rush. League average EPA is 0.02. And median EPA per pass out of 12 personnel is 0.23. So the Steelers, with all their tight ends, which I thought if the Steelers actually had a path to being a good offense, an above average offense this year, it would be because of the multi-tight end usage and the mismatches that's able to create, and Pat Freiermuth vertical shots. And we saw that on the one play down the sideline, that the corner route towards the sideline, but Freiermuth couldn't haul it in. Those are the tendencies, right? We're seeing more of a shift to shotgun. We're seeing the running game struggle because of it. the running out of the shotgun. We're seeing play action fall off. We're seeing less motion at the snap. All of that is very Rodgers-y stuff, and it was very Big Ben stuff at the end of his career, because veteran quarterbacks who are old and can't move want to sit in the shotgun, have a static picture, know the defense they're looking at, and know it's not going to change post snap. And especially when they turn their back on play action or anything like that. Rodgers acquiesced in week 1, and I think as things got tough, like some of it is game script again, because you fall behind, you can do less play action and whatnot, but there wasn't much of it early in the game. There wasn't much under center early in the game. So I think as you get less time to kind of game plan, these teams obviously game plan the first 2 weeks a little more specifically in the offseason leading up to it. But you saw a very Rodgers heavy offensive attack. And I think that's only going to continue. And it's because Rodgers is going to have a lot of leeway at the line of scrimmage to make decisions as he sees fit. And that's a reason Kenneth Gainwell's on the field like crazy and played 26 snaps in week 2 after being just pretty much a net negative, a solidly offensive net negative in week 1. Obviously, he forced the fumble on the kickoff that led to a touchdown. Rodgers wants Gainwell out there over Caleb Johnson because he's better in pass protection. He trusts him more in pass protection. He trusts him more as a pass catcher, because you don't know if Rodgers is going to go to the line and change from a run to a pass or from a pass to a run. And that's how you end up with a lot of Gainwell carries, because he's, doing that thing at the line of scrimmage. But when it puts worse personnel on the field, that's not good. Like, this is all a problem. And that stuff is the tendency stuff. Let's look at where Aaron Rodgers is actually going with the football, right? And the types of throws he wants to make, can make, and the types of throws that this offense needs to be predicated on to fit a 41-year-old quarterback that, in my opinion, does not have it anymore. 2.64 second time to throw this season. These numbers are through 2 weeks. 2.64 second time to throw is the 6th quickest in the NFL. 5.8 yards, 5.8 yard average depth of target, 35th or last, also known as last in the NFL. 3.3 average completed air yards, also last in the NFL. So the average air yards that the ball is traveling on an Aaron Rodgers completion is barely over 3 yards. If Aaron Rodgers completed 3 passes for 3.3 yards, you'd have a measurement for a first down. His average air yards, average completed air yards. Average air yards to the sticks. So this is a good measure of aggressiveness and willingness to push the ball, especially on third downs. And, it factors in early downs, but it's maybe more impactful on later downs. Are you throwing short of the sticks? Are you doing the Kirk Cousins thing, just taking the check down and the completion, but you never have a chance, right? Average air yards to the sticks, negative 3.6, second to last in the NFL. Only CJ Stroud is worse, and that has a lot to do with the struggles of the Houston offensive line. For the season, on throws 10 to 19 yards downfield, which account for 12.7% of Aaron Rodgers' attempts, which is not a very big amount. Rodgers has a 25.5 passer rating, 37.5 completion percentage, and 7.6 yards per attempt, which ranks 25th in the NFL. For the season, on throws 20 or more yards in the air, throws that travel 20 or more yards in the air, 11.1% of his attempts, a 74.1 rating, 8.7 yards per attempt, also 25th in the NFL. Has yet to attempt a pass over 20 yards downfield outside the numbers. Oh, and on top of all of that, he's taking negative plays. That sounds like the statistical profile of a quarterback that is just looking to mitigate negative plays, right? A quarterback who is trying to be the antithesis of everything we all complained about with Caleb Williams last year, right? You're just getting the ball out quickly. You're getting it to your checkdowns. You just don't want to take negative plays. You want to keep things on schedule because maybe your team runs the ball really well. Maybe you're just trying to break habits, whatever. But that sounds like the statistical profile of a negative play mitigator. And yet, Rodgers is taking a sack on 30.4% of his pressured dropbacks, which is the fifth worst in the NFL so far. He can't push the ball downfield. He can't move. He can't create. He won't continue to go under center and do the play action stuff that worked to the tune of 10.1 yards per attempt in week 1 against, granted, a very bad Jets defense. Everything I feared about Aaron Rodgers has come to fruition. I don't think this is a very good football team, even if it had a good quarterback. And I don't think the Steelers have a good quarterback. There are coaches and offensive play callers, game planners who could probably work with this version of Rodgers. He's still relatively accurate. His completion percentage over expectation is negative 0.5%. So fairly accurate quarterback. You could get him to do, right, if you're Matt LaFleur, I think you could still, if you bent his will, you could get him to do a lot of the point and shoot stuff that has always worked in a Shanahan, McVay, LaFleur, anyone on that tree offense. Maybe not Kevin O'Connell, because Kevin O'Connell pushes the ball downfield a lot, and I think that's why JJ McCarthy is running into issues and did on Sunday Night Football. But I think there are absolutely play callers. Maybe Mike McDaniel is one, though he doesn't seem to be a very good head coach. He made the most of Tua, who was kind of a similarly profiled quarterback that can't move, can't create out of structure, takes a lot of sacks when he's under pressure, but is pretty good at reading things out, is a pretty quick decision maker, can throw with anticipation, can throw with accuracy. Ultimately, that offense has been figured out, but it's been made to work. I think there is a play caller out there in the NFL. Maybe it's McDaniel, maybe it's somebody else, who could make this version of Aaron Rodgers work. For 17 games, you could probably produce maybe the 15th best offense in the NFL, but probably not with this offensive line, with this cast of characters at wide receiver, and certainly not with Arthur Smith calling plays. I was impressed with what Arthur Smith did in week 1. I think it's pretty clear that Rodgers has taken over and commandeered the offense. So we can try to talk solutions. For a quarterback like that, I don't know that there really are any. And that brings me to something in the chat. If this from Jacko Blades, if this happens X games in a row, will they bring in Mason? I don't think you can. Right? I think there's a world. I'm not a Mason Rudolph guy at all. I've never been a Mason Rudolph guy. I think there's a possibility it could work a little bit better for a small stretch, right? Rudolph doesn't give you any of the off-platform creation stuff, doesn't give you any of the scrambling upside. That's been a really big problem because Rodgers can't scramble literally at all. And none of that improves with Rudolph, but Rudolph is willing to stand in and take a hit. I don't really think Rodgers, he took some licks, but I don't really think Rodgers is the type that's going to stand in there under duress and really fire anymore, nor can he physically. Rudolph can get you some verticality into the offense, but then you're kind of doing the Russell Wilson thing again where you're like, hope we hit some deep balls and that'll work 2 times and not work 5. I don't think in terms of would it do anything to help if they brought in Rudolph? Will they bring in Mason Rudolph? I don't think there's any world in which you can, because that's the end of Aaron Rodgers' career. And I just don't think Mike Tomlin's going to do that unless it gets really, really bad. I don't think there's any way that Mike Tomlin is going to finish it for Rodgers. And I think Rodgers is pretty cooked. But I don't think there's any way that they would pull that ripcord, especially after you saw the loyalty that he showed Russell Wilson after, 3, 4 good games last year. They were willing to go into the playoff game with him starting at quarterback. So I don't think there's any world in which they actually do start Mason Rudolph for any stretch that, Rodgers is healthy for this season. But would it help? Only marginally, not enough for the circus that would invite. So I think the Steelers are in a pretty bleak situation. And I wanted to talk leading into that. I wanted to talk into that comment. I wanted to talk solutions. Offensively, you just have to run the ball. And I don't think you can run the ball. I don't think you have the offensive line to run the ball from shotgun as much as they want to, as much as Rodgers wants to. So you have to make him get under center. And you have to hope that if you're stubborn enough about it, Fautanu and Broderick Jones start to round a little bit of a corner on the ground and you just make some type of headway. If there's any injuries on the offensive line, I think this goes from bad to worse. So my advice would be to lean heavily into the under center play action, outside zone running. I don't think outside zone is like the best way to run the ball anymore. I think that's become pretty clear that a lot of the teams having more success are doing it either with, quarterbacks being involved in the run game, like the Eagles and the Ravens, who can do it out of pistol, do it out of shotgun because they have the 11-man run game as to their advantage. But others that are doing it with more power stuff and duo stuff and heavy personnel. The Steelers want to run heavy personnel, but the Bills run the ball really well that way. If that's what you want to be under Arthur Smith, be it. Get Caleb Johnson on the field and just see what you got with the young guy. Stop with the Kenneth Gainwell carries, and maybe that'll help. I think that would help offensively. But I don't think that's a long-term solution, knowing the deficiencies on the offensive line. And then you have to take shots off of that, be willing to take shots off of that. The week 1, no deep shots to DK thing, I chalk that up to Sauce Gardner on the other side. You have a really good matchup with Calvin Austin against Brandon Stevens because any NFL wide receiver against Brandon Stevens is a really good matchup. This week, no boundary deep shots just strikes me as odd. And I think a lot of it is Seattle was shading towards DK. They were not going to let DK beat them. Every time he did have a deep route, he was pretty heavily bracketed. He had safety help over the top. And that's what you're going to get if you can't run teams out of it. So it all starts with the run game. Defensively, solutions. It probably starts in the same place. You got to stop with the nose tackle Keanu Benton experiment because it has failed. And that is not Keanu Benton's fault. He's not a nose tackle. That's okay. He's a pretty good penetrating defensive end. Let him be that. Just Y.A. Blackett knows all the time. Daniel Ekwale can get some reps at nose. He actually was really impressive in his limited work, had 2 pressures, and I thought he looked really good as a pass rusher, oddly enough, and a lot of those reps came at defensive end, not at nose. But okay, I'm fine with that rotation there. Hope that Harmon getting back makes you a lot stouter along the defensive line. But even then, I have really big issues with the secondary. Not just the roster construction aspect of it being as old as it is. And again, I keep saying this, but like move for move, it makes sense. Signing Darius Slay after he got released by the Eagles was largely done so the Steelers could protect their comp pick formula and get a compensatory pick for the free agents that they were losing, because players who were released, like Aaron Rodgers, like Darius Slay, don't count against that compensatory pick formula when you sign them in free agency. So I understand that signing. I understand the Jalen Ramsey trade because you were ready to move on from the Minka contract. I thought that contract was kind of ugly. You had a feeling that Ramsey could age fairly gracefully into a safety spot. I agree with. It looks like he's fairly cooked in coverage right now, especially in man. The interception notwithstanding, he still got beat on that play and just had to take a gamble. Got lucky Darnold made a bad throw. But I understand that move, and I liked that move, especially when it nets you Jonnu Smith, who can do a lot of the stuff yards after the catch that you need to do on offense if you're not going to push the ball down the field vertically. So like move for move, I'm understanding all of this, but it ends up with an aging secondary, a question mark named Joey Porter Jr., who had a pretty promising rookie year and a subpar sophomore season. And you're going into year 3 with him. And not much depth, right? Brandon Echols started in the Joey Porter Jr. spot. You didn't see the Seahawks picking on him very much. It was 11 targets Jalen Ramsey's way. So many of these moves I understand in a vacuum when they happen. It just ends up in this spot where you need to revamp things. You need an influx of young talent so badly. And you need the young talent on your roster to be developed to circle all the way back to the beginning of this. And I don't think the Steelers have the coaches on the coaching staff, either at individual positions like Pat Meyer on the offensive line or Mike Tomlin in general, to be innovative enough scheme-wise to give the players advantages early in their career and build up their confidence with, layups and whatnot, in the passing game, just easy touches with space. And I don't think that they're good enough at developing talent in general to make good on an influx of new players. So you're set up where everything is building to this crescendo for this home draft you have, where you're probably going to trade up and get a young quarterback, and you have 12 picks, and you just need this injection of young talent, and hopefully that can float some of the veterans. But that feels like you're trying to thread a needle, man. It really does. So I have long-term issues with where the Steelers are at, but if we zoom in to week 2, week 3, I don't see many fixes. I see more outs long-term because you have all those picks. You have, the veterans that can be traded for some more draft capital and whatnot. But when you're zooming in to week, I don't see many solutions other than you hope this gets better. You hope Derek Harmon is a real savior. Like, you have to hope that he immediately transforms the defensive line. And the issue is why Black looked better than him in the preseason. And it's preseason. I'm going to evaluate Harmon clean slate once we get started in the regular season. But Y.A. Black hasn't looked like he did in the preseason. No surprise. He looks like a rookie. It's pretty bleak from my perspective. And Grayson Brown brings up a pretty good point. Here's the solution. Stubborn coaching has to change. Utilize the personnel you have correctly. That's to the Keanu Benton point. Abandon the arrogance. Please utilize the talent you have correctly, both sides of the ball. I agree, absolutely, for like certain test cases. I also question the amount of talent on this team. There's a lot of names, especially on defense. I question the amount of talent that's actually still there. I'm interested to see if TJ Watt can turn this around. And I'd be interested to hear in the chat if you guys think he's going to. But I had my trepidations about that contract when it was signed. Ultimately, I talked myself into it, and I'm sticking to the point of where's that money going to go if not to TJ Watt? And he's still fairly transformational defensively in terms of you're never going to run his way. He's just so good against the run. Teams don't run his way. He can still blow up plays on the backside. And he draws a lot of attention, whether it's on pass rushing prowess or name recognition. It doesn't matter because it creates one-on-ones on the other side. And we've seen Highsmith and now Herbig feast in back-to-back weeks. But that's a lot of justification for a guy who hasn't had a sack in 6 consecutive games going back to last season. So I'm interested to see if the Steelers can find a way to jumpstart Watt. They actually did move him around in week 2. They actually did get him involved in different stunts and different twists up front. It wasn't just all go beat the right tackle and a chip because you know the chip's coming because the offense knows where you're going to be. It really wasn't all that. There was some different stuff, and Watt still wasn't winning. Again, 8.7% pass rush win rate per PFF. He's one of the players I'm most interested in because when you're in a situation like this, you need the guy you're paying $41 million to pull you out of it. In 2019, 2020, 2021, he could. He was that caliber of player. He could pull you out of that. That's why the Steelers' record was so drastically different with him on the field and off. Is he that guy anymore? I'm really not sure. He's somebody I'm going to be watching really closely against a questionable New England offensive line in week 3. And then the other thing that I'm going to keep my eye on is the play action rate and the amount of snaps that Rodgers takes from under center. Those are the canaries in the coal mine to me about if this team can turn things around. I don't think they will. Either there's, it could be because of stubbornness, like Grayson said in the chat, or it could just be because Watt doesn't have it and Rodgers doesn't have it. I don't expect it to turn around, but those are the things I'm going to keep my eye on, and I think everyone should keep their eye on in week 3. Are the Steelers getting back to their under center play action that worked really well in week 1? Are they using play action more and more effectively? And can TJ Watt make a real impact against Drake May, a talented quarterback, but a young quarterback? We'll see. And I'll be back with you on Sunday right after that game to break it all down with an instant reaction. If you want more of the Still Curtain podcast, like this episode, subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube, subscribe everywhere you get your podcasts, and come back on Wednesday, just 2 short days from now, for Tommy and Shane's Wednesday breakdown, looking at week 2 and looking ahead to week 3 a whole lot more than I did. I know I'm excited to get their opinions on where they're at with the Rodgers experience and everything after 2 games and a 1-1 start for the Steelers. I'll talk to you, and I'll be back with Mark Powell, who is going to be back from his honeymoon for the Instant Reaction show next Sunday after the Steelers play the Patriots. Until then, have a good one, and as always, go Steelers.